Thursday, August 1. A different kind of Messiah. Read Mark chapter 6, verses 34 to 52. What was the problem Jesus and his disciples confronted, and how was it solved? Mark 6, beginning at verse 34. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. By this time it was late in the day, so his disciples came to him. "This is a remote place," they said, "and it's already very late. Send the people away so that they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat." But he answered, "You give them something to eat." They said to him, "That would take more than half a year's wages. Are we to go and spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat?" "How many loaves do you have?" he asked. "Go and see." When they found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. Then Jesus directed them to have all the people sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and fifties. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them. They all ate and were satisfied. And the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces of bread and fish. The number of the men who had eaten was 5,000. Immediately Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowd. After leaving them, he went up on a mountainside to pray. Later that night, the boat was in the middle of the lake, and he was alone on land. He saw the disciples straining at the oars because the wind was against them. Shortly before dawn, he went out to them, walking on the lake. He was about to pass by them when they saw him walking on the lake, and they thought he was a ghost. They cried out because they all saw him and were terrified. Immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." Then he climbed into the boat with them, and the wind died down. They were completely amazed, for they had not understood about the loaves. Their hearts were hardened. After the disciples returned from their mission, they go with Jesus to a remote area on the eastern shore of the Sea of Galilee to rest. But a large crowd of 5,000 people arrives at the location before them. Jesus sees that they are like sheep without a shepherd. He teaches them the entire day. In the evening, the disciples recommend sending the crowd away to find food, but Jesus tells them to feed the crowd. The ensuing dialogue in Mark 6, verses 35 to 38, which we've just read, illustrates that the disciples are thinking in human terms about how to solve the problem. However, Jesus resolves the problem by miraculously feeding the large crowd with just 5 loaves and 2 fish. Characteristics of this story play into the popular concept of Messiah in Jesus' day. The expectation was that the Messiah would liberate Israel from her enemies and would bring in righteousness and peace. A large number of men in a desert setting would carry with it military overtones of revolt. And we're going to compare here with John chapter 6, verses 14 and 15. After the people saw the sign Jesus performed, they began to say, "Surely this is the prophet who is to come into the world." Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him king by force, withdrew again to a mountain by himself. And then in Acts 21, verse 38, "Aren't you the Egyptian who started a revolt and led 4,000 terrorists out into the wilderness some time ago?" This notion is strengthened by the reference to Jesus seeing the people like sheep without a shepherd. A partial quotation from Numbers 27:17, where Moses asked God to appoint a leader for Israel after him. And that verse reads, "To go out and come in before them, one who will lead them out and bring them in, so the Lord's people will not be like sheep without a shepherd." This phraseology about a shepherd for God's people appears elsewhere in the Old Testament, typically with reference to Israel's lack of a leader or king. And we compare this with 1 Kings 22:17. Then Micaiah said, "I saw all Israel scattered on the hills like sheep without a shepherd. And the Lord said, These people have no master. Let each one go home in peace." And 2 Chronicles chapter 18 and verse 16. Then Micaiah answered, "I saw Israel, all Israel, scattered on the hills like sheep without a shepherd. And the Lord said, These people have no master. Let each one go home in peace." And Ezekiel chapter 34 verses 5 and 6. So they were scattered because there were no shepherd. And where they were scattered, they became food for all the wild animals. My sheep wandered over all the mountains, and on every high hill they were scattered over the whole earth, and no one searched or looked for them. Yet Jesus does not meet their false expectations. Instead, he sends his disciples away and dismisses the crowd. And rather than lead a rebellion against Rome, what does he do? He retreats to a mountain to pray, not what the people were expecting. In place of the popular view of the Messiah as a king who liberates Israel, he comes to liberate people from the bondage of sin. His walking on the water displays to the disciples that he is indeed the Lord of nature. But he does not come to rule, but to give his life as a ransom for many, as you read in Mark 10:45. "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." And so to finish the day, what should this story tell us about why a correct understanding of prophecy is important? If a false understanding of Christ's first coming led to disaster for some, how much more so could a false understanding do the same for some in regard to his second? This lesson was read by Dr. Percy Harrold for Christian Services for the Blind. Sponsored by the Sabbath School Department and distributed through Hope Channel Australia, this podcast is also redistributed by Hope Channel Germany, Christian Record Services for the Blind. It is also available on SoundCloud and through multiple podcast distributors, including Apple iTunes. And you can listen and watch at the same time on YouTube. Remember, God is always faithful.